86th Popcorn Forum since the commencing of this program in the spring of 1971. I am going to be the moderator for today's program, and I would like to ask your patience because it's very crowded, and also we want to stay on time if possible. I will do something that I normally do not do in the hosting of the Popcorn Forum on behalf of the students of North Iowa College and the Student Board. At the close of today's debate, I will issue a statement that I have just given to the reporters, and that will come to the close of the debate. When attempting to meet requests that we received, we set up a very specific format that we would use today, and we will adhere to that format very strictly. We have asked each speaker to have, if they wish, 20 minutes to give an opening statement. At the end of that 20 minutes, then there will be questions from the audience. And each person that asks a question, we ask you to please rise and state your question when recognized. After you ask your question, both members of the panel today will have the opportunity to respond to that question. Our first speaker today is from the Aryan Nation, and he will have 20 minutes, Mr. Richard Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. We do appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you students. I never realized there was this many here in North Iowa. We appreciate this opportunity to see if we share the same thoughts. As I understand that I am representing everything that you people oppose, according to the statement in the Coeur d'Alene Press. What is it then that we do stand for? I think most of you probably only know of us through media exposure of one kind or another and of hearsay. I believe that Mr. Walker would agree that hearsay is not evidence in fact. In other words, hearsay in courts are not generally allowed as a factor on which you can make a judgment of a people, of an idea, or of an organization. So therefore, we would like to get away from some of this hearsay and present to you some of the ideas which we hold. These ideas are not new. These ideas stem from the very foundations of this nation. They go back to the Magna Carta of 1215. The ideas that are presented in the Holy Word that we hold true to the best of our ability, contained in the Bible, both Old and New Covenants or Testaments. So therefore, the ideas is what seems to be fearful. In other words, they fear the ideas that we present. What are some of these ideas? Well, Professor Wilson, Harvard University, 1790, 1 year after the adoption of the United States Constitution, stated that there was a purpose for government. And the first and only and complete purpose of this government, newly formed after the conclusion of a successful revolution, was that the government was to represent the interests of the people, and in representing this interest, that it was existed solely and only for the preservation of the people from whom the government was formed. Professor Wilson went on in his lectures as he was setting up at Harvard the format in which new students such as yourself, who were to be the leaders of the nation, as it was being formed and solidified, so that they would have the principles upon which this government would stand. Now we know, of course, most of you know that the Declaration of Independence was almost solely and wholly lifted from the works of John Locke. We have sort of a memory hole coming from which George Orwell wrote quite a bit about. We're getting a new type of situation. I remember when I was debating Mr. Stokely Carmichael in San Jose, that we have a difference now of a cloud of academic freedom. It seems as though that academic freedom is reserved for freedom of thought on one side, but not on the other side. There was a division that was laid down there, and certain things are permissible and acceptable by the press when said by one certain people. For instance, Mr. Louis Farrakhan, for instance, does not receive very bad press, although it is sometimes denounced, for making a statement that Black's Law Dictionary makes, that Webster's makes, Funk and Weigel makes, and just a very simple statement that his race was his nation. Now, this is paramount throughout all of the dictum of organized societies throughout the world. Now, I do not receive a very good publicity for making that statement, but these were the statements that were made by Professor Wilson. And we have a whole string of now PhDs who have come out, who belong to the Institute of Historical Review, who also support this because it is fundamental of natural law order. It is a natural law order that you can see in your forests, you can see in your streams and in the lakes and in the seas. There's a natural law order. Kind follows kind. Kind begets like kind. This was laid out, of course, by Moses in the first chapter of Genesis. Seed having likeness of, kind begets like kind. Now we propose that, yes, let us follow the natural law order. Let us have these separations that God himself has ordained. This is not hate, but of course, if you've read Orwell, he said that we were going to have certain hate weeks to divide one another because we have accepted and do follow a natural order. We notice, for instance, I'll just give you a couple of examples, that there was supposedly, according to the press, some kind of a bombing down at a synagogue in Boise, Idaho. And then it turns this report in here concerning an alleged Holocaust and neo-Nazis and Nazis and everything else is mentioned in here. When we had a similar experience up here, there was no mention made, very little mention about a very destructive device that was set off at our church compound. Mr. Evans, who is governor, he's promising that they're going to find the Kirklis, which I hope he does. But I want to point out to you that 3 other synagogues were destroyed back east very recently. And we found out then that finally an arrest was made. And it was a member of the synagogue who perpetrated the fires on these 3 synagogues, the arson which destroyed 3 of them. After that, why, no more was said. Prior to that, it was always a right-winger, a white supremacist, or a neo-Nazi, or something like that, who had done this. Previous to that, in New York City, why, there were swastikas being painted on the synagogue. Who was arrested? It was the rabbi, who was the rabbi of that synagogue, and he was arrested, and he's been tried in New York for painting swastikas on his own synagogue. Now, I think he has the right to do that if he wants to. But there's a certain reason behind all of this. For one, it generates income, money, it generates fear. These are the things that, of course, they can from the members of the synagogue, they can extract more donations for protection because there's fear of these people whom they say are terrible or who want to destroy and destruct all the Jews, for instance. We say this because it is self-evident that while people proclaim academic freedom, I think that we have academic fraud going on. There's a lot of things that have been put in your memory hole. When I went to college, we had as a major part of our political science, had to study and write reports on George Washington's farewell address. Now, many students I've asked about this, and they said, well, we've never heard of it, never read it. Now, it used to be in all your political science books because that farewell address was used as a model to understand exactly what this nation was about. Now, some of the things that, of course, that I am for, and which apparently the we, whoever they are completely opposed to me on, is number one, I do not believe that we should be engaged in foreign wars. I opposed the Vietnam conflagration. It had no part and parcel in sending our people over there. I believe that we had no right to be dragged into Korea, nor World War II, and I'm a veteran of that war. I spent 4 years in that war. Now, I have served at that time what I thought was the honorable interests of my nation. I served because I felt that it was my duty. But I find now that perhaps maybe there was some ulterior motives. So I was opposed now, and I am opposed to sending our people into a war over in Lebanon. I'm opposed to the displacement of the Palestinians out of their land, out of their country, and I'm opposed to furnishing $10 billion a year to support an aggressor in Lebanon, which is not any of our business. We have no business in supporting a warfare against civilian population over there, which, according to the figures, there's been over 30,000 civilians killed, 250,000 wounded. I'm opposed to the fact that we have eternal war for eternal peace, as Orwell has declared. I'm opposed to the fact that since the United Nations was formed, there has been over 300 wars. There are wars going on today. I say that we are out of line with the natural, God-ordained social order that he has laid down from the beginning. And the more that we deviate from this social order, the more that we are bringing students out of the university who do not know the backgrounds of their own history, who have no idea of what they are here to do, in other words, where they came from, why they're here. I do these on just natural observations. If you're told what to think and not how to think, if you are not taught, that used to be the major purpose of a university or a college, was to teach youngsters who are coming into the world to take over the operation of society, to be the pillars of society, because this is what university students are, those who are academically qualified, intellectually qualified, to go on to the higher order of our society. You are to become the leaders of opinion. You're to become the leaders of that which is good for all. But if you are told only what to think, and not instructed as to search out for yourselves, to resolve within yourself if certain things be true or not, if you do not question these things. In other words, my daughter, for instance, going to the University of California, and she was bringing home some of her work papers, and she let me see them, and I said, well, Bonnie, this is not exactly correct, you know that. I said, history did not teach these things. She said, I know, Dad. She says, but you want me to maintain my 4.0 grade average. And she says, I have to give the answers and write it the way the instructor tells me to. Otherwise, I'm going to drop in my grade average. So she said, don't worry about it. I know and understand, but I must do this. So she did, and we had to let her go at that. Now, these things do bother me. These things bother me because, yes, academic freedom I am 100% for. But I'm not for a controlled academic license to instruct and to inculcate and to mold opinions along certain lines which are absolutely false. For instance, we are condemned because we have put out the record of Menachem Begin. Now he receives your money. Now Shamir, of course, has replaced him. But nevertheless, we have a tremendous lack of knowledge that has been put into the memory hole in which we do not have any information on this man and what is atrocities. For instance, there are certain things now that we have that have absolutely obliterated the meaning of language. Terrorists, for instance. So long as the terrorist is on one side, they are freedom fighters. If they happen to be on the wrong side, according to public opinion, then they are terrorists. They are either Liberation Army, if they are the good people, according to the press, or they are terrorists on the other side. Now, the entry into Lebanon, for instance, for 11 months prior to the assault and attack, invasion of Lebanon, there hadn't been one single instance of border incident. Not one shot had been fired. But yet this invasion has continued. We have people now, of you, some like you, who have died over there, some 270. We had the cover-up of the Liberty ship in which over 250 of our sailors were killed, maimed, in an attack, an assault upon a ship of the United States Navy. These things were never brought out. It's now coming out. They call them revisionist history. In other words, bringing out things that have been covered up. I do not believe that your interests are being served by covering up and trying to put a different face on absolute truth. I do not believe in the fact that, as Napoleon stated, he said, history is made up of the lies that the victors have agreed upon. I do not believe that we are serving anybody's interest by bringing forth chapters of history that have been agreed upon when we know that certain things are absolutely and totally false. I do not believe that Professor Arthur Butts should be censured and his books removed from the libraries of our colleges. Now, they're saying that today, the post-academic professors say, oh, we're all for academic freedom, but we're going to remove certain books because they contain ideas or facts that we cannot refute. Now, Professor Butts or Professor App or Professor Christensen, all of these are eminent, qualified PhDs. Why should their thoughts, their facts, not be allowed to enter into your college curriculums? Why is it that these eminent men who have proved themselves beyond a shadow of a doubt, their qualifications, not be allowed to be discussed so that you yourselves can within yourselves decide if these things be true? Why is these researches forbidden? The same thing, of course, is going on in your language. For instance, we have mobile mounted range technicians. How many of you know what a mobile mounted range technician is? It seems like nobody knows what it is. Well, in your government bureaucracies, this is a new phrase for a cowboy. You know what alteration of comfort means? Alteration of comfort means pain. So therefore, we have a new language. It's called newspeak. It is a new language that is coming up to confuse, to obliterate, to cause a lack of understanding. What is a death today? You've got a newspeak for death. Lawyers have called it a spousal rollover. So that's death. In other words, when one of them dies, why then they can get in and cut up the estate. Or, if it's a hospital, you have what? You have negative patient outcome. A negative patient outcome. So the patient died. That's simple, isn't it? So what we seek is, of course, the language of communication that directly corresponds to what you yourself can attune yourself to. That you hear these words and then the communication comes exactly as you are capable of understanding it, and not in language that is calculated to confuse your mind and to give you a different impression of what we understand. I'm going to read here, in conclusion, I don't know how much time I got left, just 1 minute. God's reality and his essential medium of the spiritual. They realize that this natural order is governed by a moral law to which all man-made associates must conform. Only by moral law can human beings and society be constructed and created. These are the conditions which generate moral and spiritual life. Social laws which contravene the moral law produce exactly the opposite effects. Demoralization of everything. Magna Carta. This was the thing, Magna Carta. Thank you.
Our opposing speaker today has been the prosecuting attorney of Cooney County for the past 6 years, Mr. Glenn E. Walker.
Thank you very much. How about that, Roy? Talk about newspeak or doublespeak. I don't know really very much about what he said. I don't think I have a great deal of interest in his views on foreign policy, and I doubt many others do. And I'm certainly not going to rely on hearsay as I address the Aryan Nations movement. I have done some scant reading on the subject. And of course, I'm not debating Mr. Butler. There's a little bit of a misleading thing in the paper. We're each speaking, and then there'll be questions from the audience. You can't really debate someone who makes his own meaning or puts his own meaning to words different from the rest of society. But if Mr. Butler feels discomfortable here because so many people appear to disagree with what he believes in, he should be comforted by the words of Confucius when he said, "It's good to be among friends, even if they're not your own." Ladies and gentlemen, before accepting any new client, the conscientious lawyer is always going to check to see if there may be a conflict of interest. And Mr. Butler in the past has said that his law firm is Smith & Wesson, Coat & Ruger. In other words, he does not respect the rule of law as much as he respects the use of violence and obtaining results through fear and intimidation. In this case, I can assure Mr. Butler that neither I nor any member of my staff have ever been members of that law firm. In this case, I can assure you my law firm is America. I believe in the American dream, in religious freedom and freedom of speech, in a democratic society, and the great melting pot. I believe in our pluralistic society, where different people and different ideas compete, yet live together in peace. But I also believe very strongly in speaking out on racism and violence. And our President Ronald Reagan observed, and I'll quote, "A few isolated groups in the backwater of American life still hold perverted notions of what America is all about." And he said, and President Reagan further said to those bigots who preach violence, quote, "You are the ones who are out of step with our society. You are the ones who willfully violate the meaning of that dream that is America. And this country, because of what it stands for," he said, "will not stand for your conduct." I want to talk to you today about part of that American dream, about the right to be free from fear. Mr. Butler has talked about fear, but in fact, that is their whole method of operation. Fear is a natural thing that we all learn to cope with, at least to some degree. But before we talk about it, we should consider what is this learning process that he spoke about also in our schools and colleges. Good school teachers and college professors try to teach us to criticize and critique, to analogize and analyze, to be skeptical and to study, so that we then can form our own beliefs, but in a rational manner. And as an attorney, I try to use these same reasoning skills. But we have to be wary because a demagogue works at a completely different level, at the emotional level. Bigotry is the rigid intolerance of differences and of those who hold such differences. Americans know that there is no such thing as a monopoly on truth. Americans love the different, the new, the challenging. It's the different and new ideas that make us grow as persons. Now here today, we may have 500 people here, and I see so many different kinds of people, different colors and national origins. It's obvious to look around. And as sure as we're all here, every one of you has different views and ideas on subjects. There's not two people. There may have been 70 billion people that walk the face of this earth, but there's never been more than one created the same way. That's the way of all God's creatures. And that's why, with so many different views on life from all the people, the demagogues and the bigots of this world have always ultimately failed and will continue to fail, because we are free to choose our beliefs in America. And we don't have to accept the bigot's view. That's the law. And as long as we respect the rights of all of us, including the least of us, to have that freedom of belief, then the law firm of Smith & Wesson, Colt & Ruger will never be more than it is now, an empty, veiled threat. So really, a bigot is intolerant of Americans because we are all different. The question becomes then, can we ignore them? Well, not in my opinion, not for 1 minute. Those who advocate violence toward their enemies, quote unquote, they are anti-American. And we, as Americans, then naturally become their enemies because we are all different. Winston Churchill had the right idea of democracy when he said that democracy is the worst form of government on this planet, with the exception of all others. And democracy indeed can be very confusing to the intolerant and exasperating to the bigot. Democracy stretches across the entire range of political philosophies, from the liberal to the conservative, and through the range of both of our great national parties. But violence and bigotry are not part of either. And people who would follow teachings of Richard Butler, the preachings of Richard Butler. They are not just a radical wing of the American conservative philosophy. Nazi bigotry has no place in conservative politics because to oppose big government is not racist. To oppose big spending is not racist. To advocate traditional values and individualism and free enterprise, this is not racist. So why do we even bother with a public discussion of such extreme anti-American views? Well, there are many who would argue that race-hate groups such as this should be ignored because they don't deserve the publicity. I disagree with that, and I do so because under close scrutiny, movements such as the Aryan nations are insignificant. But ignored, they have the potential to become dangerous. And the whole reason that the United States of America was formed, the reason we came into being, was so that people could live with different backgrounds and different views with freedom, and most particularly freedom of religion. Even so, there are indeed racists in this country, and indeed right here in North Idaho, even though that they are few and insignificant. Their main tool is fear. It's the absolute foundation for their propaganda. Now we know that fear is a very powerful psychological tool. In fact, we also know that the psychologists experiment with small animals in conditioning cages in the laboratories. And they do this in their attempt to learn if behavior can be modified. And they find that it can. Laboratory animals are severely stimulated with electrical shocks, and the conditioned response to these shocks is aggression. It's raw violence. It's one animal then pitted against another. And watching these frenzied rats being shocked tightens your stomach. And then seeing these hapless creatures square off and attack each other is deeply, morally repulsive. And our common sense tells us that the theory behind these experiments can be dangerously misapplied. These little creatures of God are not natural enemies, and only man's manipulation of them makes them attack each other. And in a way, the Aryan Nations movement tries to capitalize on this theory of behavior modification. These behavior-shaping methods are detestable when they're used for unethical purposes, such as changing of moral values and changing of beliefs that should be based upon rational thinking. They use the fear of the unknown to unify races, the fear of different religious beliefs, of unemployment, of Jewish conspiracies, fear of mixed races. They use the fear of anything to justify the aggressive nature of racism. And like God's creatures used by the scientists in the laboratories, the bigot uses fear and intimidation to pit human against human for no other reason than to promote his intolerant beliefs and impose them upon others. Because, of course, that is the only way he can come to power, which is, of course, their goal, that of exclusive authoritarian power. All created by one God, humans are not natural enemies. And it is only a fear born of ignorance that could ever make us attack one another in such a way. And if the demagogue can wrap his followers in a cloak of ignorance, then fear of violence toward others can certainly follow. Now he directs it at Jews and blacks or Orientals. But maybe it could be you if you don't accept his views. Why then do you think that movements such as this recruit followers from our prisons? They promise the loser in life a chance to be somebody. But of course they must wear this cloak of ignorance and accept the racist belief absolutely. Why do you think the racists use religion and a church to promote these views? Because history shows us, and they know, that some of the very greatest evils in the history of man have been done to fellow humans in the name of religion. It too can become a cloak of ignorance to be used by the racists to pit one human against another. What can we do to prevent the misapplication of this phenomenon? We have to maintain a constant vigil against such evil, and we must meet this challenge as a team, because maintaining our freedom takes the same kind of teamwork as does climbing a mountain. And in my opinion, Americans have been meeting this challenge of racism. Today there's far less hate in America than before. Yet all that would be necessary for the forces of fear and evil to prevail in this world would be for a few good men and women to do nothing. Do nothing, and success can never be achieved. Do nothing, and fear takes hold. Do nothing, and racism thrives. Do nothing, and fear begets violence. Do nothing, and racism becomes institutionalized. Do nothing, and we risk reliving the horrors of the Holocaust. And that clear challenge will always face our nation. In the past few years, I'm sure you're all aware, some ominous events occurred here in Kootenai County and to some lesser degree in other parts of the state of Idaho. Vexatious racial propaganda was being circulated, and acts of violence and harassment promised to beget others. George Bernard Shaw stated it, all the savagery, all the barbarism, dark ages and the rest of it, of which we have record as existing in the past, exist at the present moment. And he said, no matter how far man advances, ignorance and evil can never be eradicated. Well, it became apparent in this state that even in the face of small demagogues, it was necessary to draw the line between freedom of speech and conduct which causes harm or real fear of harm. The citizens of Idaho rallied together as a team to meet this challenge. I supported a tough new law banning malicious harassment in Idaho, and the Aryan nations, of course, lobbied against such legislation. I advocated strong legislation which would fairly protect individual rights, as well as making it a felony to threaten personal injury or deface property because of a person's race or color or religion or national origin. And overwhelmingly, the people of Idaho supported this law, and the Aryan Nations movement has made few converts, and they continue to consist of only a few hardcore individuals. Now, this new law certainly did not immediately solve the problem. There will always exist a tension between freedom of speech and belief on one hand and the advocacy of unlawful acts on the other. But the minute any group resorts to violence, not only will the malicious harassment law be enforced, but all other laws will be equally applied. Never, however, never will our American freedom of speech be infringed upon. The state of Idaho then has officially recognized the constitutional right of every citizen to harbor and express beliefs on any subject whatsoever, and to associate with others who share similar beliefs. That's the American way. But the Aryan Nations movement certainly does not hold to such American democratic principle, and to the contrary, the Aryan Nations Manifesto, Mr. Butler's very own written manifesto, specifically precludes any non-Aryan race individual from speaking. The Idaho legislature and the people of Idaho have demonstrated to the nation that our basic freedoms cannot be menaced, that any doctrine of hate is to be denied its double-edged sword of violence. And still, the Aryan Nations movement can espouse its views freely, without fear. When Idaho's Malicious Harassment Act was passed last year, our citizens gained a significant freedom from the fear of personal threats and the defacement of their property. The new law will be enforced. The principles of American democracy will be strictly adhered to, and we will never give an inch. We will never give an inch to racial violence. Significantly, in Kootenai County, our Christian community has spoken out loudly against Mr. Butler's self-serving views on Christianity because the Aryan Nations movement distorts both Scripture and history. Christians in Kootenai County have strongly proclaimed that his views are heretical, a complete, absolute departure from Christianity, and in no way to be appropriately called by the name Christian. They have called upon our community to see the Aryan Nation movement for what it is, a propagandistic, racist movement that hides its true evil nature behind the goodness and the name of Jesus Christ. To Aryans, Christianity is race. Richard Butler has stated, quote, "Christianity for the Aryan is race, and race is Christianity." And further, quote, "True Christianity seeks above all the preservation and increase of Aryan man." But you can't really debate the Bible with Mr. Butler because, again, he makes up his own meanings to words. You probably all heard the story about Jesus traveling through the back roads of Samaria when he became tired and thirsty. And he asked a Samaritan woman for a drink of water. Now, the Samaritans were a mixed breed, a mongrel lot, so to speak. They were looked upon as being unclean and impure of race. And the woman expressed her surprise at Jesus requesting of her a drink. And she said, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans." But of course, Jesus had no racial prejudices. And even though he had been rejected by his own people and would later be rejected by the very same Samaritans that he was ministering to, white supremacists have attempted to Christianize their prejudices by distorting various biblical passages. They are like those who tried to entrap and embarrass Jesus with the written law. When Jesus was asked, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus asked him, "What is written in the law?" And the answer had to be factual. And it came back, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself." And Jesus' reply to this was, "This do, and thou shalt live." The command, ladies and gentlemen, is to love your neighbor as yourself. This is the difference between knowing certain words or certain passages in the Bible and doing them with love. Really, the very greatest condemnation of the Aryan nations is that they ignore the true Christian theme, love. Above all else in Christianity is the message of love. And the message of love should not be twisted into a sword. The golden rule was taken from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and it tells us how to treat our neighbors. It's absolutely fundamental to all of Christianity. It is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And ladies and gentlemen, this message presents a challenge to us all. I think education is really the key to this challenge. I would hope to educate. I would hope to motivate. I would hope to help to eliminate complacency. I want to speak the positive about this great, unique American society. And I speak vigorously for both democracy and diversity. For if the light of reason is not focused upon hate mongers, and if legitimate community leaders do not stand up and decry the warped use of religion in support of bigotry, if demented philosophies are not examined and derided by those with the good sense to condemn their insanity, then the insanity through lack of condemnation may gain credence with the gullible. In all of my career as a lawyer, I've been very fortunate because I have been able to represent justice in all of that time. And I've always told juries at the close of trials that by their verdict, they're setting the standards for what kind of community we're going to have. And I urge them to not leave to some future jury somewhere down the road the opportunity to set the standards for what kind of a community we want to have. So to be effective in contributing to your community, you have to have a deep commitment to people, have a set of principles, have common sense. That's all it takes. You've got it, and I urge you to use it. I've run out of time, so I want to just close. Well, maybe you could have another 10, Mr. Butler. We must act. We must take an active part in our community with positive and strong responses to today's challenges. We're all salesmen. We've really been selling since we've been born, either selling ourselves on ourselves or others on ourselves, or we're selling services and products. And I'm urging you as individuals and as a community to be that great American salesman and not leave to others somewhere down the road the job of determining just what kind of society we should have. So learn about the rights that you have. Understand that everyone, no matter how different they may be from you, they have the same rights. And insist that your neighbor's, his rights are as strongly protected as your own. And only then will the racist cloak of ignorance be rendered a useless garment. Treat everybody you meet, regardless of race or religion, exactly as you would like to be treated. That's the absolute guarantee of a successful life. And even if Mr. Butler is not aware of it, that's what the American dream is all about. Thank you.
The second part of our program will be one of questions and answers, and I will recognize the individual who wishes to ask a question, and I'll ask both of our speakers to remain seated, and they have a mic at the table, and that will speed up the process. I would particularly like to give the students of our college the first opportunity because the forum is for them, and then we will try to get as many questions as we can. Let's see, question here. Oh, yes.
Hello, Mr. Butler. My name is Mike Gilliano. I'm the student body vice president at North Idaho College. Anytime I've presented a question before, I've stood as a representative of the college, and this time I'd like to back off on that. I'm talking completely for myself, for my own opinions, okay? You claim that this is all hearsay, and that the people that are talking to you today go by hearsay. Well, I want to deny that, and I want to say that I've been to your church. I've got material from you, cassettes in the form of books. I've seen this stuff, and I've come home with a biased opinion. I don't degrade you or hold any animosity toward you because of the views you hold, because thank God you live in America. Thank God you can come here, and you can get out of this place without receiving any bodily harm. What I want to say is that where you come into conflict is that you hold your views, and you do it in the name of God. My office is downstairs, and I apologize, I have to leave for class, but you come down there, and I would like to introduce you to a man who is the only one through history to ever say, I will break down the barriers between all men, and his name is Jesus Christ.
Question or a statement? I don't understand what the question is, and I would like to respond if it is a question.
It is a question. An invitation for you to visit with him.
Well, I'd like to respond. Number one, do you have a dictionary in this college? Do you know what the word bigot means? Do you know where the word came from? Bigot comes from by God. The Rollo, Duke of Normandy, was the one who said, I will not obey you, king, because I go by the law of God, by God. And that's where the word comes from. Now we're attacked as bigots And of course, we seek to go by the law of God, and of course, this is true. We are by the law of God. Now, Jesus Christ, of course, was drawn up, and the crowd, just like you, stood up and screamed, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." This was the roar of the crowd at the crucifixion, when Pontius Pilate was, of course, judging him. You see, Jesus wasn't accepted, period, only by a few followers. So when we think about these things, let us understand exactly what it is. Now, we talked about the firearms thing, but he didn't quote Thomas Jefferson when he said, "The strongest reason for the people to keep and bear arms," Thomas Jefferson, "is as a last resort to protect themselves from the tyranny of government." Now, we do adhere to the Second Amendment that states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I want us also point out, in answer to his question, that we have a republic. This is what the Constitution was there. There is not one statement, organic statement, in any part of the organic papers, declarations, books, or anything else concerning the fact that this was organized as a democracy. It was a republic. You still give your pledge of allegiance, if you do, to the republic for which it stands, not a democracy. A democracy, as all history will tell you, has always failed and ended up in confusion. And believe me, you are ending up in confusion. The suicide rate for teenagers today is 14 times what it was when we started this new organization called democracy here in the 1940s.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Well, of course, Mr. Butler, obviously we have a republic. I think everybody in this room knows this, but what they know and you don't is what kind of republic it is. It's a democratic republic. As to the rest of it, the question by the student is a far better answer than I could come up with.
May I apologize, I didn't tell the speakers how long we want to keep the answers to a minute so we can get in more questions, and I didn't do that. Yes.
My name's Gloria. You said during your talk that your daughter brought home some papers from her college in California where she had to learn history that was not according to the rules from here. Could you give some specific examples of the types of things that she had to learn that were wrong? Or the types of history that you said have been covered up, some specific examples?
Well, I was alluding to that, the Washington's farewell address, which set the example for all people to follow. In other words, in their thinking. If you've studied George Washington's farewell address and have written papers on it, what your thoughts on it are concerning the new American government and their conduct in foreign affairs.
What I wanted to know.
And that it was the version that was given of George Washington's farewell address and what the version that she was given, and we have a copy of it.
I'm sorry that I didn't get the question. The question from the student was, what kind of information did she bring home that she was unhappy with the report she had to give to the faculty in
In other words, it didn't hold to what George Washington said. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you. There's one question. Mr. Walker.
Nothing.
Next question.
Butler, I'd like to address you. In your speech, you really avoided the issue. You said that his race is his nation, and you spoke about the Constitution. But nowhere did you mention that all men were created equal. And I would like to know, what is this natural God-ordained social order that you're speaking of?
Did everyone hear the question? Okay. I'll try to paraphrase. It's difficult. She made the point that I believe in our Constitution and in religion it talks about that all persons are created equal, and she wanted to know
What natural God ordained social order?
what the natural ordained order was.
Scripture tells you that God separated the nations by their races and so forth. And the Declaration of Independence said all men, not persons, were created equal. Well, I'm sorry that they're talking about all men, and that's what it says. If you don't believe it, put out your book and read it. Not all persons.
Let's let the speaker
Let me again let you understand what you may not have known, that it was the white Anglo-Saxon, Nordic, Germanic people who created that document. Each one of them that signed it was a slave owner. Now, I do not have any brook for slavery, but I'm saying to you that they were talking about men, in this case, in the context of what they created their society, which is based, of course, going back to Magna Carta, the Articles of Confederation, Mayflower Compact, and all of this.
Okay, would you please be quiet when the speaker is trying to answer a question? That's really important. Mr. Walker, you want to respond?
Well, I think it's all the white supremacy groups try, as I've said, try to Christianize their beliefs. And there's no way of saying that exactly what they believe. So it's very difficult to make it out because they put their own meanings to words. But one of the views of white supremacists is based on the account of Noah and his 3 sons in Genesis. It's chapter 9, verses 20 through 27, where it erroneously assumes that Ham was a Negro and that Noah's curse on him therefore extended to the entire Negro race. And another prevalent view is that Eve, that these white supremacists have, not necessarily Mr. Butler, because I can't make out all of his, is that Eve had sexual intercourse with Satan in the Garden of Eden and bore Cain. Abel, of course, was her child by Adam, is their theory. And Cain then is identified as the seed of the serpent in Genesis 3:15. And the Jewish race is descended from him. And then the Jews fled into the woods, where they had sex with animals and created all kinds of minority groups. This is the way so much of the teaching goes. But the bottom line is that they don't consider minorities as human. That's the way they can justify their attitudes.
Next question, please. Lady.
I won't give you my name, Mr. Butler, because I'm not completely Aryan and there is a little fear. However, I have a question for you. I was with my husband in Germany when the occupation forces were there. And how can you justify the thousands and thousands of children that other Aryan nations got rid of?
Did you get a question? Okay. She is asking a question about, I believe you said in Europe, and she was wondering in relation to Germany, is that correct? What happened to
The Aryan nation.
the Aryan nation? And she directed the question to Mr. Butler.
I still don't know just what happened to it. I was in the Far East most of the time. I fought my battle against the Japanese. But what I do, and I do feel I have the right, and anybody else has the right, to be concerned of the 32 million white Christians who died in World War II that you never hear anything about. I'm concerned about the 250,000 women and children that were firebombed in Dresden, non-combatants. I'm concerned about the 196,000 women and children that died in Hamburg. Now these are my people. Now there was 32 million by your department or records of government that died, Christians, not just anybody else, but it was white Christians who died in that war.
Just let
Now, 32 million white Christians is what I'm concerned about. I believe that I have the right, and everybody else who, the freedom of association. I believe that freedom of association is one of the guaranteed rights that everybody has a natural law order right. And I believe that I have the right to advocate the preservation of my race. Now, most of you people do not believe that, but I do believe it.
Okay, Mr. Walker.
Next question.
My name? I want to disclose my view. For years I've been getting your literature in the mail, and I've press releases, things like that. And I'm interested in most of your writings and your posturings on paper. All you can read is nigger, 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 Jew, Jew, Jew. And up here, you're kind of couching your words. You're kind of holding back. I'm wondering, why don't you use the word nigger, and let's get to the nitty-gritty of what you really believe. Do you believe that Hitler was our Hitler a great man? Now, is that true?
I think he was a very great man. I
You
think
believe in blacks and niggers, right?
Now, wait a minute. One thing I'm going to tell you. You're a liar, because there has never been a press release coming from Aryan Nations to you or anybody else that could contain the word nigger.
Have you seen it,
No.
Glenn?
I don't know. This is your...
There I'm going to call you out. Now, I'm going to tell you something else. Do you know the origin of the word nigger?
You tell me.
Okay, it comes right in your dictionary. It's Niger. You have the country of Niger. You have the land of Niger. And this is all over the face of Africa is the Niger River.
It's Niger.
This is the
Niger.
origin.
I believe Mr. Walker has an answer also.
Now, that is your origin of the word.
I
Now,
have press releases bearing your letterhead with the word nigger on it, and I'll show them to you.
well, I sure wish you would, because we have never put out a press release to you or anything else.
Okay, Mr. Walker.
I don't have anything for that.
Next question.
All right, the nigger shootout.
Let's please, one.
I just like to figure out something. You seem to have a cap on religion, your views towards what God really wants. You say you follow God's ways in the Bible, so maybe you can tell all of us what race God is. I live in
Okay. We're going to Genesis
I'm sorry,
chapter 1.
I apologize. It's difficult. Okay, we'll probably repeat the question. The gentleman asked the speaker what race God was. He had never seen God. He would like the speaker to tell him what race he was. Mr. Butler.
The only thing I can tell you is, if you read in Genesis, that Adam was created. If you look at the genealogy of Jesus Christ, it takes you back to Adam, who was the son of God. Adam means, of course, capable of blushing in the Hebrew. It means to show blood in the face and so forth. This is the description, as close as anybody can come to it, from the Hebrew Concordance. Now, Jesus Christ said that he came from the lost sheep of house of Israel, nobody else. So now we have a confusion as to what Israel is. And the confusion is the fact that we find that nowhere in the scriptures, clear up to the book of 2 Kings, do we find a description of them. And then it says in the book of 2 Kings, 16th chapter, Israel was at war with the Jews. Now you're going to have to figure that one out.
Mr. Walker.
Well, Mr. Butler, if you'll check Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and Romans 4, it's pretty clear that Abraham is identified as the father of the Jewish race.
No, it is not. And it does not say that. This is what I'm talking about, aggravated fraud. And nowhere does it say it. The Jew is not
Let Mr. Walker finish his. Let him
11
finish
books of
his-
the Bible.
Let him finish his statement, Mr. Walker.
I don't think there's any way that God limits his promises of blessings to the Jews or to the Israelis or to the Hebrews or whichever group that Mr. Butler would want to identify. Rather, he told Abraham in Genesis 18:18 that all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him.
Nation.
Thank you, Glenn. First of all, my name is Christopher Byron, Mr. Butler, and my wife is Jewish, and I'm a born-again, spirit-filled Christian. I would like to say... Hallelujah! All you beautiful Christians out there. I would like to say, Mr. Butler, I have received some mail from some organization representing the Aryan Nations, I would say. And on one of the postcards was a pig stuck to a rocket with a free ticket for all Jews to go to the moon. And on the other postcard I got, Mr. Butler, was a ship full of Negro people or black people or colored people, whichever doesn't offend anybody here, okay, hanging off of this ship with a free ticket for all niggers to go to Africa.
Good.
So that, Mr. Butler, first of all, is the truth, whether you want to receive it or not. Now, according to this book here, which is the King James Version of the Holy Bible, it's a King James Version, according to the Apostle Paul, who wrote a letter to the Galatians, Mr. Butler, I'd like your attention. But after that, I'm reading from Galatians chapter 3, 26 onwards, 25. But after that the faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. For ye are all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, that means slaves. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Paul then talks in the first chapter of Galatians again, he says, I marvel that ye are soon removed from him that called you unto grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there is some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ.
What's your question?
But though we are of an angel from heaven...
Please order. I'm already in the meeting, and I'll let it know when the question's over.
Acknowledge your presence. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than you have received, let him be accursed. Now my question is, how could you justify yourself talking about moral and spiritual liberty here today, Mr. Butler, including Mr. Gilbert? How can you justify yourself as a humanitarian with all what's been written here and all the filth that you advocate?
Mr. Butler.
In the first place, Apostle Paul was talking to the Galatians, wasn't he? That was his epistle. That's who he was talking to. And just like the epistles to Timothy was his letters to Timothy. And second place, Jesus Christ himself, and that's one whom I'm quoting, is the one who made the declarations. And he said that if you love me, you obey my commandments. His commandments must have been the fact that he was the embodiment of the living God in the flesh as a kinsman redeemer. Why do I say this? Because he declared unto the Jews, before Abraham was, I am. So therefore, the commandments that were given under the household of Israel, whom we say is the many-nationed tribe of Israel, who exists at the cradle of our civilization in Europe and now are regathered here in the United States. Now, the commandments were very specific in their law order of these commandments. And of course, if you look in Leviticus and the commandments, there was absolute death penalty for miscegenation. Now this was a commandment that's carried on through even into Revelations. In other words, what God has ordained and what he has created, man was not to put asunder or to destroy, because you destroy both races when you advocate or commit miscegenation. Now this is God's law that's laid out in the 26th chapter of Leviticus. Now these are things that we are to maintain pure. The word adultery, for instance, in the original Hebrew, and if you read it on your Bible, look it up in your concordance, it says not to make impure. It has taken on a little bit different connotation this day. But adultery, and the word adultery, means to mix or make impure. Now, we have the word Judean and we have the word Jew. And as I said to you before, there is nowhere you can find in the King James Bible, including the 12th chapter of Genesis Mr. Walker was talking about, he does speak an untruth, because it does not say Abraham was a Jew, and you will not find that word in the first 12 books of the Bible until you come to the fact that Israel was at war with the Jews.
Mr. Walker.
Period.
Mr. Walker.
Well, first of all, I wasn't quoting from Genesis. I referred to Romans and Genesis. I think the biblical principles of universality and equality clearly strike and cut to the very heart of the Aryan nation's doctrine, and it becomes, upon a study of these basic principles, completely incompatible with Christianity. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 12, or chapter 10, verse 12, said, "The same Lord is Lord of all, and bestows his riches upon all who call upon him." And you know, when people represent to you certain things, and you see after a while that they're phony, it's hard to recognize anything that they say as having any legitimacy, and I think that's a problem that we have with Mr. Butler.
Reverend Morris.
Mr. Butler, I've heard you define several Hebrew words for us today. I'd like to know where you studied Hebrew and for how long?
With Dr. Swift, and probably for about 3 years, I guess.
I've been in the training for the ministry for about 9 years. I studied Hebrew for 1 year out of that 9 years. And I've never, ever, anywhere seen Adam defined the way that you have from any of the original Hebrew texts.
Well, for your information, Mr. Morris, you can pick up Strong's Concordance, Cruden's Concordance, or Young's Concordance, and you'll see the definition. Now, all you have to do is be able to read and look it up.
English concordances, they're not Hebrew concordances. I'm asking you about.
I'm saying that these are the concordances that they have been recognized.
I think that
do not teach us to think critically, and you stated that that in order for us to get a good grade, we had to think the way they do, or the way they told us to. Now wait, you smoke this. Now I've been here at North Idaho for 2 years, and every class that I have had has been critical thinking and my own point of view. And it was not to be negotiated by the teacher's point of view in any way to intimidate me to change my mind on a subject. And I'm talking about such issues as euthanasia and so forth. Now, I want to know exactly where you got your information as to the statistics that college teachers are intimidating us to think on their point of view. Now, we are taught in school here at North Idaho and across the country to think critically and to get the point of view that we feel is in our heart. So I want to know exactly where you got your statistics.
Did I want to hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay. The student said that she had spent 2 years at North Idaho College, and during that time she had a lot of instructors, I believe, and she had been taught to think critically and look at all sides. Is that correct? And that she is wondering, from Mr. Butler's statement he made earlier, that professors at colleges do not allow you to think critically or to disagree with them without getting a bad grade, and she did not agree with that and wanted to know where you got his statistics. Did I get that right, Mr. Butler?
Well, it's the general trend. For instance, as I point out to you, have you studied John Locke's Of a State of War?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And do you agree with John Locke?
I agree with some of his philosophies, not totally.
And do you agree with his Christian view?
I am not debating religion.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you study John Locke Of a State of War, exactly what we're stating here today. Now, if you've examined it, whether you agree with him or not is not important, but it's the fact that you had the opportunity to study John Locke, Sidney, Montesquieu, and the rest of them. Now, we don't take things out of context. What we try to do is present the philosophy that created the Magna Carta and come on through, which is the philosophy of the Declaration of a Nation, a state for our nation. And this is exactly what was created in 1789 when it was finally concluded.
Okay, that's fine.
Now, this is the philosophy that we say was a racial race.
Okay, we got to go on. Mr. Walker, your comment? I'm sorry.
Next question.
David, in the back.
Mr. Butler, you said that you you haven't found the individual or individuals responsible for bombing your church a few years back, but you held a press conference at the North Shore that was televised around the Northwest here, Inland Empire. You accused Mr. Gilbert of blowing up your church.
No, he didn't.
How come you characters don't get along?
That is a lie. I accused the Jewish Defense League, which also last night attacked a guy, did not accuse Gilbert, accused the Jewish Defense League. Mr. Walker has a telephone tape recording of the fact that Mordecai Levy of the Jewish Defense League claimed responsibility, as does the sheriff. And the sheriff, under sheriff, does work for the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith.
Okay, Mr. Walker's turn.
First of all, I don't know of any such tape. Maybe the sheriff's office does have one, but they didn't share it with me if they do. It's interesting how Mr. Butler, in his speech earlier, accuses the Jews of blowing up their own synagogues in order to get publicity, but he certainly, of course, would not admit any potential for such a thing exists in his own movement.
Mr. Walker, we were not insured. We sustained $80,000 worth of damage.
Okay, Mr. Butler,
and the synagogue only received $4.
Let me have your attention, please. I must make a statement at this time, and there are classes that still go on at North Idaho College under academic freedom. Bear with me, let me make this statement to you, please. And I really thank you for coming. It's been wonderful how many people turned out, and that you were in a country where you could ask your questions in freedom. And I want to end with this statement. When you receive a speaking request from a movement or organization that opposes the great principles to which you are most dedicated, that being equality of all persons, regardless of race, national origin, creed, sex, or other such characteristics, it is the most difficult task you ever face to consent to that request, and it has been soul-searching for this speaker. But as a great national statesman once reminded me in a conversation that we had together, if we Americans have such fear of these individuals and ideas that we say no to free speech, then democracy and free speech suffers a great setback, and that which we fear most has won a victory. I am grounded in the most deep faith that in a public debate, the truth of equality for all persons always shines forth, and the great wrongs and evils of racism become clear. Thank you for coming.